Hello and welcome. I'm Rizat Andrushevska. I'm one of the people who organized this event tonight. The situation in Palestine, the U.S. Okay, is that better? Because it sounds extraordinarily loud here, but if you can hear it, that's okay. All right. The situation of Palestine, the U.S., and many other countries is increasingly more dire. Our news is increasingly sound bites, fast fashion, and Orwellian, giving gatherings like this increased importance. We'd like to thank the Fremont Methodist Church for their moral clarity to support events of this nature. We would also like to thank the Jewish-Palestinian Alliance of Oregon, the American Council for Palestine, Democratic Socialists of America, and Jewish Voices for Peace for co-sponsoring this event, and our panelists for volunteering their time and bringing their expertise to us tonight. Our moderator, Lydia Kesling, is the co-chair of the Palestine Solidarity and BDS Working Group for Portland chapter of DSA. She is a novelist and a culture writer whose essays have appeared in The New Yorker, The Nation, and many other outlets. She was 2018 National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree, and in 2025 was awarded a Miller Foundation Spark Award for Oregon artists. Pertinent to this evening's event, she holds a master's degree in Middle Eastern Studies from the University of Chicago and spent 3 years as the outreach director for the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at the University of California at Berkeley.
Hello. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you for that generous introduction. I know there are a lot of competing demands on our time and a lot of sense of overwhelm at all of the events of the last weeks, years. So it means a lot that you're out here tonight. I wanted to briefly say before we get started with our program, I went to a poetry reading last week of Palestinian poets who live in the area, and one of the speakers reminded everyone there that when we're having these educational events, to not forget to kind of bring into the room the people who are the most affected by the topic at hand and ongoing genocide. So to that end, I want to encourage everyone at the end of the evening, please check out the table in the back. You'll see a QR code for the organization JISR, which is new-ish in Portland and is supporting 4 families from Gaza, medical evacuees who are here healing and need your support both as a volunteer and your financial support. So please, if you are so moved, do look for that QR code and give a donation or your time. Just to give you an overview of what the event will look like, we have these 3 amazing speakers. Each of them is going to speak for about 10 minutes. After that, we'll have a 25-minute, I'll have some questions for them, and then I'm sure you all have questions, so we'll open it up and spend about half an hour on audience Q&A. So please be thinking of what you'd like to ask as you're hearing these speakers. And we'll begin on the far side of the table with Mazen Malik, who a lifelong advocate of equality, social justice, civil and human rights, and Palestinian rights. Over the last 45 years, he has been a founder and member of many rights organizations. And a professional economist, he holds degrees in sociocultural anthropology, mathematics, statistics, as well as economics. He's given speeches, lectures, interviews, and many media appearances on the Middle East and Palestine. He's the author of multiple studies, reports, and articles about Palestinian rights and topics ranging from public finance to current economic issues, and we are so lucky to have him with us here tonight. So please take it away.
Thank you all, and thank you for the nice introduction. So what I would like to talk about is basically today try to dissect and analyze some of the U.S.-Israeli alliance as we have seen it, at least in the few years, and the history of that. So if you think the U.S. policy towards Israel seems represent an extraordinary alliance with such a strong ties that really baffles the mind, baffles observers and analysts. Think and consider that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, would be the first foreign leaders to address the joint session of U.S. Congress 4 times. Last time in 2024, reflecting his prominent role, of course, in the U.S. and international politics. And this achievement, to his credit, surpasses the 3 times that Winston Churchill, who led the UK and Europe during the World War II, and in addressing Congress. So keep in mind that the last time he addressed Congress in 2024, he was leading amidst a genocide. And also when the ICC was actually looking to issue a warrant for his arrest for crimes against humanity and for using starvation as a method of war. So it becomes more apparent how unusual and extraordinary that this moral and ethical standards between this alliance is so diametrically opposed from the rest of humanity. So this alliance also comes with fully equipped with an unparalleled level of military, functional, financial, and full diplomatic cover and shield on the world stage. Just think of the aerial bridge continuously transferring weapons, materials, expertise, and intelligence in the last 2 years. Think of the more than 28 billion in aid transferred since October 2023. Think of the US military posture and operations in the Middle East since that time. So with that alliance, the question becomes, was it always this strong? Was it always this unshakable bond with what they describe in quotations, shared values? Or has it grown, changed through the time? And what were the bedrock bases underlying this alliance? Well, let me suggest, as the slide would say, that it would be too simplistic of analysis to say a singular factor only is the effect of possible explanation. And let me further suggest that the relation and alliance currently depends on at least 4 main components. These represent 4-legged stool, if you will. These are the Jewish Zionist movement, or what is known historically as the political Zionism. And in other coming slides, it will be symbolized as JZ. Christian Zionism, CZ, and the economic financial interest is number 3, with the 4th being the liberal democratic values and ethics. Liberal democratic, small l, small d, in this description. So the first 2, which is the Jewish Zionist movement and the Christian Zionists, are truly ideologically committed. These 2 will do regardless of any other factors or effects. This is almost close to President Trump saying, if I am on the 4th Avenue and shoot somebody, they would still vote for me. So the other 2 are evolving and influenced largely by time, progress, and understanding. The other 2 are basically just to remind you, are the economic and financial interests and what are commonly referred to as the economic interests of the core industrial, financial, and technological spheres, or collectively known as the interest of the empire. The fourth one, the liberal democratic ethics, are the value system that permeates the American socio-cultural system. This has evolved with all kinds of contradictions. Just think about the historical process, from pilgrims and pioneers escaping European oppression while committing extermination campaigns against the native people, to slave owners defending their rights to own property, to segregation, to supremacists, to fighters for world freedom, civil rights, individual rights, anti-war, and revivalists, neoliberals, etc. All while still evolving structure of acceptance of rights and liberties for all. So the historical context, just to take into account, and we could probably go to the second slide. The historical context shows different level of effects on the US policy of these different forces. They were not always the same effect, or they were always worked in the same way. So if we go through history and try to delineate these forces and which were more influential at different times, we would first look at the Jewish Zionist movement, the political Zionism in the 1890s. It was primarily looked at as a fringe movement among Jews, often rejected, sometimes ridiculed. And even after the World War II, Zionism was not prevalent among American Jews, but gained significant influence. Albert Einstein would not endorse the state structure of that type of thinking. However, he always also looked at the Israel treatments of the Arabs as the moral question. So even in the time of 1948 recognition of the State of Israel, remember this was an early victory for the Zionist movement. However, you have to give credit to the liberal, democratic, remember that sphere, of the American politics. US President Harry Truman, that was the first world leader to officially recognize Israel, probably stories have it between 8 and 14 minutes after the declaration of the state on May 14th. So his decision came actually contradictory to what US policy should have been or would have been at that time, or what was advocated by Marshall, the Secretary of State and the previous leader of the Department of War. So in that sense, Truman was the first liberal type icon that actually jumped into that wagon against the official policy. And in the stories they say that after his advisors were all trying to dissuade him from that recognition, when he says, and I quote, "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I have to answer to hundreds of thousands who are anxious for the success of Zionism. I do not have hundreds of thousands of Arabs among my constituencies." So, of course, these were the first two important segments of that support and that policy. However, in the 50s, with the liberal Democrats kind of taking away, and here comes a new administration, Eisenhower being the Republican, it basically actually returned back to where the U.S. policy would have been for U.S. interest. It all came in glaring clarity at the time of the 1956 invasion by Israel, France, and Britain when they invaded Egypt, about the Suez Canal, or what's known as the Suez War. And actually, the administration at that time coming in so strongly and putting ultimatums and economic sanctions and so on, to the point where they all came back. And it was so embarrassing for at least the British. The Prime Minister had to resign and so on. It was basically changing the structure. The United States was seeing at that time United States and France as these old colonial type of countries, using the old relic of colonialism, and they didn't want to inflame the area. And basically, also as a result of that, there was an arms embargo on the Israel and the Middle East by the United States at that time. However, that did not, of course, don't get the impression that Eisenhower was a dove, by no man. Eisenhower actually intervened in Lebanon in 1958. It's known with our ancestors as the Marines on the beach in Lebanon. And he basically continues that kind of vision where the United States type of influence was not directly in support of Israel. That role fell to France at that time. France was the advocate of Israel, the supplier of arms. Not only that, but France was the one who built the Israeli, or assist in the Israeli nuclear program in building that. And France to the United States was seen at that time as also the past, the colonial past, that the United States did not want to engage in. Now that continued on until, of course, things changed. Israel was seen as a counterweight to Soviet influence, strategic Middle East, and so on. Things started changing when JFK, the icon of liberalism as we know it, at least in official sense. Okay, I thought my time is up. So that JFK came, and basically he was the one who lifted the embargo on the arms, and actually became the one who first put military support programs for Israel. Moving along quickly, in the 60s and 70s, Israel support became the majority view in the United States, and especially in the liberal corners of politics and socio-political establishments. Remember, in those times, from the 70s, 60s, 70s, and on, the liberal Democrats, and this time big L, big D, had almost 60 years of ascendance and control of the U.S. House. That at one time it was 40 years of uninterrupted democratic control of the U.S. House. And that's what we used to call the democratic clock. That changed, of course, at a certain time when Newt Gingrich came. But we'll talk about that at a different time. So if you look up at the position of the liberal Democrats after Truman, such as Robert Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, Walter Mondale, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, intellectuals and media figures such as Frida Critchway, I.F. Stone, Henry Wallace, Rustin, and even Michael Harrington of the DSA, I have to say, I'm sorry. They saw Israel as a pioneering socialist and democratic society. That's where the bedrock support for Israel was. So if you go through also historic media type of materials, in 1967 war, the liberal media in the United States basically talked about our war. And it was as if you were watching Israeli programs at that time. However, also Republican presidents, Nixon, Ford, also defended Israel from a moral standpoint, because remember, this is the political center of liberal democracy. Jimmy Carter in the late 70s accomplished the Camp David agreements between Israel and Egypt, and he saw them as a pioneering and personification of the liberalism and belief of bringing peace to that area. And of course, 20 years later, as his morality could not reconcile the oppression with that belief, he recognized Israel as becoming an apartheid state. 80s and 90s, just to go also quickly at that time, witnessed something new, witnessed the ascension of the Christian coalition. The Christian coalition, the Christian Zionism. Ralph Reed became the kingmaker in the Republican politics. Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson of the 700 Club, Jerry Falwell of the Moral Majority, they both sang Christian Zionism tones through their media and political empire. Then comes Newt Gingrich, the Republican Revolution in 1994, which ended, by the way, the Democratic 20-year lock. The support for Israel has emerged at that time as not only a value for American liberals, but also in American politics, in addition to the religious aspect brought by the Christian coalition. So support for Israel has also been started to be established formally with the establishment of the Christian United for Israel in 2006, the largest Christian Zionist organization in the United States, sporting more than 10 million members. The leaders like Mike Huckabee, Michael Buckman, Mike Evans, John Moore, not to mention Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, and Dr. Phil, of course, are all that type of new right religious sphere that brought the one more slide, please. So these leaders are ideologically committed to the movement, eager to impose and realize the will of God, as interpreted by the theology of John Nelson Darby and the Anglican clergyman Hashler, who worked closely with Theodor Herzl in the early Zionist movement. So moving along during much of the 20th century, if we move from that, if you look at the economic interest and the economic financial interest, for most of the 20th century, Israel was an economic mess. Depending largely on foreign aid, hyperinflation, political and military instabilities, budget deficits, 17% of GDP. It pushed prices at some time more than 400% on inflation. And at one point, by the late 80s, reforms came. Measures of reform introduced the new shekel. The shekel is basically a 1,000 old shekel. So imagine how much hyperinflation has come through. So to a lot of that, Israel as an economic bounty wasn't as attractive to the economic and financial type of interest. However, beginning the 21st century, Israel has emerged as a center and a focal point for technology investment and research. Massive investment poured into high-tech sector, security industries, aided by the relative stability somehow caused by the Oslo Agreement and so on. Financial aid and investment were pouring from Google, Microsoft, Oracle, Intel, Dell, and NVIDIA now, Chevron, JP Morgan, BlackRock, and Blackstone.
Sorry to cut you off. I want to be mindful. Reza told me she was going to be mad if I didn't keep time. So maybe we can come back to the sort of tech and military sector during the roundtable. Would that be okay? Do you have kind of a final thought, and then we'll go to the next.
Sure. The one last word I want to see, if you go a couple more slides. There is the one thing that has happened now, and we'll pick it up after the discussion. Now there is a disturbance in the force. And the disturbance in the force is something different and new. And then that is basically where we start seeing the change.
Thank you so much for that, and yeah, I'm eager to return to your thought, and I'm sorry to hustle us along. I just want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak. Our next speaker is Wael Elasady, a longtime advocate for Palestinian rights in Portland. He's a member of Portland DSA, co-founder of SUPER, Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights at PSU. He was born in Damascus, Syria, where his family settled after being expelled from Palestine during the 1948 Nakba. Thank you.
Thanks. Um, 10 minutes is a tough time period to cover something that's in the middle of a very major change and upheaval. As Mazen said, I'm going to jump right into it therefore. I'm going to talk about a few things. I think the special, quote-unquote, nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship, which has been so devastating for the region, it flows from three interrelated points, in my opinion, that I think are worth understanding. One, and the most important to understand, is that the Middle East is a critical geostrategic region as understood historically by United States ruling class. However you want to define that. The people that have run this country since the turn of the century has seen it as a central area to be dominated, and its greater goal of being the largest, most powerful state that can, maintain control over markets and maintain its position as the top economic and military and political power in the world. The central reason for that, there's a couple, but the central reason has been oil, right? Now, that's less today because the U.S. wants access to that oil to use it, although that was the reason in the past. The U.S. now is one of the largest exporters of oil and producers of oil in the world, a wonderful thing to hang on to in the midst of climate crisis, right? But because the U.S.'s biggest international competitor, China, is heavily reliant on Middle East oil, and its capacity to maintain a hegemonic, dominant position, make sure it continues to have its hand on the spigot. And China's capacity for industrial production relies heavily, although it's moving towards renewable energy. They don't expect to be able to move their industrial capacity to renewables until about 2050, right? So that's one element. But the other element is the financial surpluses that oil produces and where they are invested is critical to the United States. The U.S. is positioned as a dominant power there determines where those surpluses are spent in the tune of trillions of dollars over the last 20 years at least. That ensures that money is directed back towards the U.S. stock market, U.S. stocks, U.S. military purchases, and that this is done using the dollar, which means maintaining the hegemonic role of the dollar globally. So it's central for the U.S. project. I don't know if people saw, just like a month ago, the King of Saudi Arabia came and pledged to spend $1 trillion in direct investments in this country. We'll see if that pans out, but those are some of the numbers that are at stake for being able to dominate that region. And the reason that Saudi Arabia is willing to spend that money, even though it's China building much of the infrastructure in Saudi Arabia today, is because Saudi Arabia depends on the security guarantees of the United States military and its capacity to dominate that region for that regime to survive and exist, right? So that's the number one reason. But that doesn't give us an understanding of why Israel in particular. That tells us the Middle East is important, right? But why not just have that special relationship? And of course, the U.S. has other allies. There's a couple of elements that are important about why Israel. I'm going to focus on two. One is the colonial settler nature of Israel. And I'm going to do this schematically. We can fill in the history in the discussion if we want. But the colonial settler nature of Israel makes it more reliable and military capable from the perspective of U.S. imperial planners than any other state in the region. Let's start first with military capability. Colonial settler states operate under a logic of elimination, whose goal is to maximize the land it controls while seeking to eliminate or forcibly remove the indigenous Palestinian population that lives there, right? What we've seen in the past 2 years in extreme form, but really what has happened over the past 75 years to the Palestinians. For this reason, settler colonial societies such as Israel are violent by their nature, by their fundamental impulse, right? Not the people, but the structure that exists. Highly militarized, permanently mobilized, and willing to escalate to complete that colonial project. This environment of permanent conflict that arises directly with the indigenous Palestinian population, but also with regional allies as a result of this situation that exists, gives it several highly advantageous characteristics of Israel in particular from the point of view of U.S. foreign policy establishment. It's sick, but it's true in terms of realpolitik calculations, right? First and foremost, most importantly, is Israel's unmatched capacity and willingness to act as a hammer. What U.S. Imperial strategists or foreign policy strategists call a force multiplier, right, for U.S. Regional power. That is something that Israelis are willing to take on, and they're tuned to take on because of that daily conflict that they're engaged in. And I think it's in this slide that we have to understand Alexander Haig, the Secretary of State under Reagan, his famous statement that Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier in the world that cannot be sunk, does not carry even one American soldier, and is located in a critical region for American national security. He didn't mean that simply that Israel is a normal ally to be leveraged in a critical region, but that its colonial nature makes it a garrison state that is armed to the teeth with the know-how and compulsion to produce and use those arms effectively. Right? And I'll talk a little bit about how that was just in display in the Middle East in this past 2 years. This allows the United States, this capacity of Israel, due to its nature as a colonial settler state and that historic role, to project force, discipline the region, and deter adversaries indirectly. It minimizes the need for large-scale deployments of U.S. troops or sustained American casualties on the ground to accomplish those things. And that's to say nothing, and hopefully Joel, or we can talk about this in the discussion, of the related fact to this, that Israel's colonial settler nature makes it a live laboratory for weapons, surveillance technology, counterinsurgency, border control, population management, urban warfare that the U.S. learns from, co-develops with Israel, adapts at home for use, or exports to other regional allies to shore up its alliance system. In other words, Israel is a testing ground for the military surveillance industry and the entire political economy, and a whole entire political economy has sprung up around this strategic relationship, right? So there's the strategic element that I described, but then there's a whole political economy and material interests that are now wrapped around this that have developed over the last 60 plus years of alliance. What is this? I don't know what this says. got a minute and a half. All right. There's the other second thing. This is actually, it does say it right. Sorry, I was just reading wrong. The second element of this that makes Israel attractive, in addition to that ferocity and that experience and that militarization that it can deploy in the region on behalf of U.S. empire, is that, again, derives from its colonial settler nature, was that it has a high level of reliability and dependence on the U.S. as an ally. And there's three aspects to this. So Israel, of course, depends for the U.S. on its most advanced weaponry and logistical support to maintain that military superiority, right? So the U.S. doesn't have to land troops on the ground, but it does need to provide logistical and advanced weapons support to be that force multiplier in the region. And Israel, as a state that is in that life and death struggle from its own perspective with Palestinians, needs that support. It sees it as a matter of existential existence. The second is this dependence is deepened beyond the need for the weapons support, because unlike earlier European colonial enterprises, Israel launched its colonization project in the post-colonial period. So it's heavily reliant on the U.S. for its soft power, its role as a hegemon. Oh, that's my timer. That can protect it from sanctions and isolation. And I'll take just 2 more minutes to kind of wrap up this point. The U.S. has been absolutely critical for Israel's global and regional economic integration. As Mazen was talking about, that capacity to become a tech giant happened because of U.S. sponsorship of the Oslo Accords, its use of the UN veto power, and more general ideological defense and propping up of the Israeli narrative through its liberal institutions and liberal language. For these reasons, Israel has no real reason or other strategic options that make hedging or realigning with other global powers like China or Russia even a possibility or desirable. That's a big difference from a lot of other regional states, right? There's been a lot of flip-flopping in alliances. Finally, unlike most U.S. allies in the region who the U.S. worries may suffer from coups, regime changes, revolutions, or electoral swings that would cause those states to break from the U.S. orbit, this is just not going to happen in Israel. Israel is not just aligned at the level of elites or of the regime. It has a population who views itself as materially, racially, civilizationally, and existentially bound up with U.S. regional dominance, and is willing to absorb the cost of long-term militarization, loss of life, and the ruin of its reputation globally to maintain that relationship and maintain an order that it sees as existential to allowing it to continue as a colonial state that can ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. Therefore, the U.S. does not need to manage either Israel's alignment or its capacities, right? It is autonomous in its ability to kill in the region and use weapons in a deadly way because of what it is, and its willingness to take the cost of military action to ensure a pro-U.S. order, as this is structurally and socially reproduced by Israel itself. The U.S. doesn't need to go in and do regime change. It doesn't need to coerce to keep Israel doing these things for it. I obviously don't have time to go through the rest of much of it, but I'll just kind of flag a few things for discussion. I think this was a relationship that had to be forged. It didn't happen automatically, right? This isn't some deterministic thing. And the Cold War era was critical. We saw some of these dynamics play out during the Cold War era. A couple things happened. Coups, revolutions, overthrew very important client states in the region that were pro-U.S. and anti-Soviet. The Baghdad Act, which included Iran and Iraq, was created as a way to keep the Soviet Union, which the U.S. was in competition with, out of the Middle East. Problem is, those populations see U.S. control as humiliating, as extractive, and they overthrew the regimes that were pro-U.S., and the U.S. very quickly in the 50s and 60s saw itself lose several states that were allies, most importantly Iraq and Iran. That's one element, that aspect of the fact that it's a much more stable ally because the whole population supports it. The other thing that it saw in the Cold War was the fact that Israel demolished Syria and Egypt in the Six-Day War and defeated two allies of the Soviet Union that had been armed by the Soviet Union, and that is when the relationship really begins to kick off. Is when you begin to see the U.S. really sending billions of dollars to Israel and seeing it as a strategic ally, as it saw those two lessons come out of the Cold War. I have a lot more to say, but I will not, because there's a lot of big changes right now. But we should talk about the fact that the post-Cold War order is collapsing and what that means to the relationship between the two. I think because the U.S. is losing its economic hegemony globally, it is becoming militarily more ferocious, and it is going to rely even more on proxies as well as its own power. I think for that reason, Israel is going to become more, not less important. Israel just destroyed in the most horrific way that is against international law, human rights, and so on, the entire quote-unquote axis of resistance. It devastated Hamas in the last 2 years. It took out about 60% of Hezbollah's personnel. It weakened Iran by its attacking it and destroying much of its anti-aircraft capabilities. It even attacked Qatar as a wink-wink warning to the Gulf states as to what happens if you want to play both sides of an area. And as a result, also the Syrian regime collapsed because of the weakening of that overall axis of resistance structure. This helped reorganize the entire regional order to the benefit of the United States. Its main competitors have been weakened. We see the Iranian regime now about to fall in large part because of the huge hit it took in its own population's eyes for what has happened over the last couple of years. Donald Trump wants to generalize that, and the little limits that existed, which were restraints because Israel could destroy the reputation of the United States and international institutions and so on. Well, let's just unfetter ourselves of those and get rid of the old human rights international order, and we'll have a new colonial era where we'll also take over new states. So they're unfettering themselves of that aspect, which means they will rely on Israel more, and the international pressure actually winds down. Now that does open up huge openings for us here in this country, because the final element of the pillar is all the things that Mazen talked about, which is U.S. support for Israel, or support for Israel, has been, up until the last 5 years, almost uncontroversial, except for a small minority, and it's been marginal in this country. And so that means even that alliance has largely been the United States' capacity to maintain that alliance has been a domestic boom. In fact, it curated bipartisanship. It was not a big problem in this country until about 5 years ago, or a little bit more, where we've really seen that support collapse, especially among the left and liberal elements of this society who have begun to see, because of how far Israel has gone, what it really stands for. And I think that's where our biggest opportunity is. I'll stop there, and we can talk some more about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Be one of my questions for you, and I think one of the lesson here is that there's too much to fit into 10 minutes on any theme on this topic. So I thank you both for trying valiantly, and I'm sorry that I have to be like the clock person. Finally, we have Joel Beinin. Joel is the Donald J. McLachlan Professor of History Emeritus at Stanford University. He taught Middle East history at Stanford in 1983 to 2006 and 2008 to 2019, and directed the Middle East Studies program at the American University in Cairo, 2006 to 2008. He served as the president of the Middle East Studies Association of North America, 2001 to 2002, and has written or edited 12 books and over 50 academic articles and book chapters. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lydia. Turn this one? Yes. Thank you, Lydia, and thank you all for coming. The lobby, the Israel lobby, is not the main force that motivates U.S. policy on Israel, Palestine, or the broader Middle East. The main function of the lobby has been to mobilize domestic support for a policy that the United States would more or less have otherwise adopted. Wael quoted Alexander Haig about the aircraft carrier. Joe Biden put it a little bit more simply: if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. So the key is that Israel is thoroughly integrated into the U.S., Middle Eastern, and global empire. That's the main reason why we're talking about this at all. And I'm going to drill down and give a couple of examples to flesh out some things that both Mazen and Wael pointed to, in part so that we get some idea about exactly what it is we're up against. Imperialism is a big word, so now we're going to see what it looks like. Lockheed Martin, LMT, it's called on the New York Stock Exchange, is the world's largest arms manufacturer by sales volume. Lockheed Martin, Israel, was established in 2014. It operates offices in Tel Aviv and Beersheba, which is emerging as a hub of military-oriented high-tech development. LMT has been arming Israel since 1971. Its F-16 fighter jets have been the mainstay of its Air Force since 1980. LMT is the lead contractor with Northrop Grumman and British BAE as secondary partners for the notoriously over-budget and underperforming F-35 stealth fighter jets. Israel has contributed prominently to the project and will eventually acquire at least 75 F-35I Adirs with Israeli customized avionics. LMT's co-production agreements with Israeli enterprises for F-35 components have an anticipated value of over $4 billion. In 2014, Israel Aircraft Industries opened a new production line to manufacture over 800 pairs of F-35 wing skins, valued at $2.5 billion. Cyclone, an Elbit subsidiary, Elbit is Israel's largest private weapons manufacturer, produces F-35 aerostructures. Elisra provides its electronic warfare suite. Rafael manufactures the F-35's advanced weapons and sensors. The F-35 and many other U.S. military aircraft use the Joint Helmet-Mounted Cueing System, a digital eyepiece developed by Elbit and Rockwell Collins. LMT Vice President for Customer Requirements, whatever that is, I don't know, retired U.S. Air Force General Gary North proclaimed, "There's a part of Israel in every F-35 that's ever been built." In December 2017, Israel became the first country outside the United States to deploy operational F-35s. It currently operates somewhere between 42 and 45 of them. Israel is a world leader in the new military urbanism. If you want to read about that at length, Jeff Halper wrote about it in his book, War Against the People. This means crowd control, border surveillance, and counterterrorism, all of that burgeoned in the form of Homeland Security after 9/11. Israel's Homeland Security sector comprises 600 firms, of which 300 export training services and goods, mostly surveillance technologies, with a value of about $3 billion a year. Israel is a leading global supplier of drones to armed forces, police, and security agencies. A promotional video by the American subsidiary of Elbit proclaims its proven technology, proven security, and 10-plus years securing the world's most challenging borders. U.S. Customs and Border Protection deploys camera and radar systems and drones manufactured by Elbit and El Beat also has a contract from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security for electronic sensing technology along the U.S.-Mexico border. In 2024, Israel's arms exports broke a record for the fourth year in a row to reach $14.8 billion, up from $13 billion in 2023, and a range of $7.5 to $8.5 billion in annual sales from 2018 to 2020. With the Gaza genocide, as Wael began to say at the very end, AIPAC and its affiliates are becoming a toxic element in many Democratic Party primaries. Whether or not this will also be a factor splitting the Republicans is still an open question. But Marjorie Taylor Greene and the like are toxic. We don't want people with a history of attacking immigrants, LGBTQ people, associations with neo-Nazis and conspiracy theorists and anti-Semites in our coalition, even if they criticize U.S. support for Israel. Locally, we have seen this with Maxine Dexter's turnaround on Israel-Palestine. In her primary campaign to defeat Sushila Jayapal, she did not criticize the $3 million that AIPAC-affiliated PACs poured into her campaign. But more recently, she has signed on as a co-sponsor of the Block the Bombs bill, H.R. 3565, and she's become an original co-sponsor of Representative Rashida Tlaib's Resolution 876, recognizing the genocide of the Palestinian people, not where we thought she would be a year ago. Like other changes associated with the Gaza genocide, this trend began years before it. Bernie's turnaround and willingness to criticize Israel's 2014 assault on the Gaza Strip and gradual moving closer to the positions of the Palestine Solidarity Movement is the key factor here. The election of the initial 4 members of the squad, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley in 2018, is another big marker. And then later, they were joined by Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush and Summer Lee, all in the House of Representatives. But AIPAC is not dead. They were able to take down Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush in 2024 primaries, though it cost AIPAC and their allies $23 million to defeat Jamal and $18 million to defeat Cori, the most expensive primaries in U.S. history. Part of the reason for their defeat is redistricting, but they were also vulnerable because they made mistakes in how they performed in Congress and in their re-election campaign. So the weight of the role AIPAC played in ousting them is uncertain. AIPAC-aligned forces were not able to unseat Summer Lee in Pennsylvania and barely tried with the original 4 squad members who are all politically too savvy for them. And the positions of the original squad members on Palestine have been adopted by dozens of other House members by now. But Israel is not about to collapse, despite claims by several in Palestine solidarity circles that it is. In addition to the integration of U.S. and Israeli military, industrial, homeland security surveillance complexes at the levels of both R&D and production and investment, Israeli and U.S. commercial corporations, technology, and personnel are closely interconnected. Between 50,000 and 200,000 Israelis make their home in Silicon Valley and other high-tech hubs in the United States. Dozens of U.S. high-tech enterprises maintain R&D facilities in Israel. Leading firms invest substantially in Israel and regularly acquire local startups. The high-tech sector is Israel's economic engine. It employs 11 to 12% of the workforce, who pay about 25% of all income taxes, and its products and services comprise about 64% of all exports and 20% of the GDP. Israel's high-tech and the closely related military surveillance industrial complex are fully integrated into global circuits of capital. Israel has over 100 firms listed on the tech-rich NASDAQ stock exchange. Only China and Canada have more. Israeli high-tech employs about 409,000 people locally, but an additional 440,000 more outside the country. Managerial and technical personnel shuffle between Israel and Silicon Valley regularly, some remaining abroad for years. Let's look at two firms just to see what goes on. Intel has invested $27 billion in Israel, more than any other foreign firm. $27 billion. It employs 9,000 people, down from a peak of 12,000 in 2021. In early 2024, with a $3.2 billion subsidy from the Israeli government, Intel announced a $25 billion expansion of its chip manufacturing operations in Kiryat Gat, Fab 38. In June 2024, after several rounds of cost-cutting and global layoffs, Intel announced it will postpone the start of Fab 38 to 2028 or later. As one part of the facility is nearly complete, forecasters predict that Intel will either put it into operation or sell it to another firm. The boycott, divestment, and sanction campaign claims that it was responsible for the postponement of Fab 38 and attributes it to Intel's loss of confidence in Israel's economy. But Intel was more powerfully motivated by its global failure to compete with AMD and NVIDIA in manufacturing AI chips and subsequent declines in market share, profits, and stock prices. Unless Intel's global fortunes nosedive, it will not abandon Israel because its capital investment there amounts to nearly 10% of its global footprint. NVIDIA is Israel's fastest growing employer with 5,000 employees. In December, it declared Israel its second home and announced that it will invest $1.5 billion in constructing a new R&D campus in the Haifa suburb of Kiryat Tivon and a nearby server farm. Its physical presence there will match the size of its Silicon Valley headquarters. The facility is designed to accommodate 10,000 employees and positions NVIDIA to overtake Intel as Israel's largest private employer. The rise and fall of competitive firms is how capitalism is supposed to work. But Intel's $3.2 billion government subsidy and NVIDIA's steep discount worth about $21.7 million on leasing land in Kiryat Tivon highlight that there is never a free market. Despite the Gaza genocide, led by the strong cybersecurity and AI sectors, Israeli high-tech remains strong. In 2024, startup firms raised around $11 billion, a 13% increase over 2023. Cybersecurity raised the most capital, while aerospace and military achieved the greatest year-over-year growth. In 2025, Israeli startups raised a record $15.6 billion in private capital, up 24% from 2024 and 68% from 2023. There were 18 IPOs during the year. The increased rate of immigration, about 58,000 annual departures in 2023 and 24 that were not offset by returns, is the single most important development of Israel's post-October 7th political economy, which, if not checked, will signal that educated, secular, cosmopolitan, and disproportionately Ashkenazi Jews do not see a future Israel in which they want to live. However, religious or traditional Jews, especially the fascist messianists who have been driving the policies of the current government, ultranationalists of all stripes, settlers, and elements of the working and lower middle classes, as well as elements of the high-tech classes, have been reshaping an Israel to their liking for decades, and they are not likely to leave. Two countervailing forces could transform the current risk factors in the Israeli political economy into a more serious crisis. One, a sharp change in U.S. policy towards Israel-Palestine, for example, an arms embargo or sanctions on war criminals, and two, Palestinian political action. Effective Palestinian resistance could radically challenge Israel's current trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I just have one question for each, and then I'll open it, and I will send it back to you, Mazen. And I think sort of it's a nice segue from from Joel's point about the tech sector and that sort of tech military economic nexus, as an economist, what have you seen be effective for activists or people who want to challenge that nexus, within the BDS movement, and what are the biggest obstacles that remain in your view?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the one thing that we might not see eye to eye on these issues, the economic kind of interest follows the profit, and it follows interest where it actually can make money, or at least not lose. During the 90s, the 80s and the 90s, it was a conscious decision by U.S. policy to integrate Israel as a main component of high tech. And of course, all the stability that came with time and so on made that possible. But think of, and many of you might remember the South African example, when the economics started pressuring the South Africa, many of the companies at the end started pulling out. And eventually that's what led to South Africa looking into truth and reconciliation. So there is a possibility of actually forcing these spheres out of this equation. However, we are not the only ones who actually understand that. They understand this very well. And I think the lexicon for the pro-Israel and in the United States and Israel itself, that BDS cannot take root under no conditions. And I think that is how vicious you would see the act against BDS is, because that would start removing another leg from the stool that probably will not allow it to rebalance on itself. So once these things start taking effect by actually pushing the levers of profits, money, and production, that would make the whole policy alliance start getting a lot more limited in its support. So in that sense, I think that where things are. In general, what we're seeing today, only one factor, and I agree with Joel that Israel is not about to fall nor to have any difficulty. The one only leg or a sphere of support for Israel or this alliance that is actually being affected is the liberal, moral, new ways of saying we don't accept as morally acceptable ethnic cleansing, apartheid, genocide, that we don't accept that these are unnecessary evils that needs to happen. And if these things succeed, I think the economics and the economic effects and the economic profit-seeking type of entities would probably be the quickest thing to pull out. You just hit their profits and they run.
Thank you. That segues nicely to my question for Wael, because you are wearing the T-shirt. So I have to ask how you see. I mean, I think the Mamdani campaign was very illuminating for just showing what has changed in the discourse and also what is kind of possible in the political field. And I'm wondering how you see something positive like that when you're thinking about this new post-collapse and changed post-Cold War era. What are the lessons from that good news?
Yeah. I think that's where a lot of the hope comes from. And I think that the main challenge for me is that at the international level, we're kind of at the opposite period of where apartheid ended, right? That is, in the sense that the U.S., there was a collapse of the Soviet Union, the U.S. emerged as the unipolar power globally in the 90s, and there was a need to kind of reorganize and attempt to establish a stability, and we're kind of in a point in which that global order was already weakened by the multipolarity that was emerging, and then is now being dismantled consciously by Donald Trump for the U.S. to try to reorganize itself and use what it sees as still its superior element, which is its military power. And it's not just the U.S., Russia's invasion of Ukraine, right? The questions of international rights are actually collapsing at the international level as a moral force and as an institutional force. And we're returning to a period much more like the one leading up to World War I, in which great powers are emerging. Now that process is still not complete, right? And this is the kind of, and I'm going to get to your question because it is connected, which is that unfettering that Trump is doing of the United States, of a system that it set up, right? He is unfettering himself internally of democracy. So the hope that we have internally around the fact that for what has come together in the last 10 to 20 years is the fact that Arab Americans and Muslims have finally become a coherent constituency in this country that can begin to electorally impact political parties that do not want to, that want to continue to support Israel's genocide and ethnic cleansing. We saw that in the campaigns in Michigan where there was a real response. The fact that young Jews are breaking with Zionism as a result of the long-time rightward drift of Israel and its then, in last year, the horrific genocide that it has carried out, in which they clearly see that the liberal values that majority of young Jews hold are in complete opposite of what the state of Israel represents. As well as what Joel pointed out, which is the incredibly important role of democratic socialists and left-wing progressives who've had the courage to finally put forward that politics, not just in the streets and in activist circles, but at the level of politics at the top, that could begin to give it a legitimacy and allow more Americans who see the news or see their social media feeds and say, this is insane, I can't believe this is happening in front of our eyes, and then those intuitions can actually be solidified into political action and into political movements that could do something about it. And so Zohran's campaign, the ability that Zohran was able to win, despite this being in New York, the city with the largest Jewish population, where the Jewish establishment in particular is very strong, yet the majority of young Jews broke and voted for Zohran. The fact that he was able to withstand the millions of dollars by the Democratic Party establishment, the attacks by the Republicans, and still win, shows that that there is a constituency in the United States who are fed up, obviously, with the savageness of the Republican Party, but also with the timidity of the Democratic centrist leadership that utterly failed and supported the genocide for 2 years before Trump took power and justified it, and tried to give it a liberal veneer in ways that they had to do mental gymnastics, and people finally broke with that. And so I think I see a lot of hope there. Now, I think where we're at is we're at a point in which our movement has to figure out how to navigate a few things. One, to be able to challenge U.S. support for Israel, we have to have a democracy. And our democracy is under direct, serious threat And so we have to throw ourselves in any way we can into the fight to fight the authoritarian measures that the Trump administration does that. Now, the way to do that, and this is where it's connected, is the centrist Democrats want to simply wait for the next election. They won't talk about abolishing ICE, even though they're running around and literally assassinating people that they politically disagree with in the streets, and the next day bragging about it and saying, yeah, well, didn't you see what happened to them the other day? Why are you out here recording me? Right? The Democrats won't come out, the centrist Democrats, in support of abolishing ICE. They continue to support Israel and defend it on these questions. They may be shying away from AIPAC donations, some of them, but the idea that they would break with Israel and put forward conditioning of aid, let alone disarming Israel or ending U.S. support to Israel, this is still being done by a small left-wing faction. It's growing, which is great, but I think us Americans that have to finally break with those lies that the centrist Democrats have been saying to us. There is a historic fight in the Democratic Party. And it is the Chuck Schumers, Hakeem Jeffries, who want to return us to the politics that are utterly disgusting, that have gotten us into this mess and allowed Trump to come to power? Or are we going to go the way of Zoran, Bernie Sanders, AOC, who actually want to fight on the question of Palestine, but also on the question of affordability in this country, on the question of actually doing something about healthcare, about doing something about the climate crisis? And so I think there's a lot of hope there, but we have a big fight to beat Trump. And to do that, we progressives and democratic socialists have to be able to win political leadership in cities like this one, and people have done a really good job in DSA of doing that, but also learn how to govern, which is a really difficult thing.
Joel, I'm really sorry to ask you about academia, but I have to. Because the university has been the site of political struggle for decades on this issue specifically. I think that anyone who comes from like a Middle East Studies department or program has come up against this. And I want to ask, what do you see as different about the kind of post-October 7th moment within academia where the students are leading the way, but the institutions are some of the biggest roadblocks, it almost feels like, toward cultivating that type of like fighting spirit that we need to change politically?
University administrations don't have fighting spirit, by definition almost. I mean, what is a university? When normal people think about universities, they think about students and teachers. That's not what the university is mainly about. When I came to Stanford in the early 1980s, people told me, Stanford University is a major corporation with a daycare center. I mean, already at that point in the 1980s, Stanford was, and had been for 2 generations, deeply, deeply invested in the military-industrial complex. So those investments generate interests. And guess what? Those interests don't include having students occupy swatches of university territory and set up pro-Palestine solidarity encampments. So for reasons I think we haven't quite understood yet, but this is an important political fact, despite my not understanding it well, Palestine has come to be, during the years of the genocide, but maybe even a little bit earlier, maybe since the 2021 Unity Intifada, a touchstone for all progressive movements, not only in this country, but globally. Any movement that claims progressive credentials of any sort. The Oregon Food Bank issued a statement condemning the Israeli genocide. I mean, that would be inconceivable 5-10 years ago. So Palestine now is front and center. It's not even the most important issue in the world, even though it's the one I've spent my life on. I would say that's climate change. But there it is, front and center, and students did take the lead, and therefore they had to be smashed. And you get a university like Columbia, which is the largest landowner in New York City, and the Board of Trustees, whose interests are in real estate and hedge funds and so Wall Street, so on. Yeah, of course, they're going to stand against the nominal values of the university. So the very viability of a liberal education, of academic freedom, of all of the values of free inquiry that we associate with universities are right up there with the Palestinian people in the gun sights of not only the MAGA Republicans, but a good number of the centrist Democrats as well.
Thank you. I know there must be questions in the audience, so I will open it up. And I have more if you're feeling shy and don't have any. But I encourage you to avail yourselves of this amazing group of people to talk with. And I can bring you a mic. Okay, we've got one in the back.
Thank you. My question is for Wael, and it's also inspired by the Zoran t-shirt. I love Zoran. I know he's gotten some criticism, though, from some elements of the pro-Palestine movement. I'm not going to get into that here, but it brings me to my question, which is, what do you think the balance should be between holding elected officials accountable on being pro-Palestine and working with the officials we have to try to achieve meaningful change?
I'll try to be. Should I go now, or are we taking? Yeah, go. Okay. I think I think we have to change a little bit our framework, and this is what I mean by maturing from, and especially in a place like New York City, where they really are there, moving from a movement that is simply a protest movement, that is largely symbolic, that has largely dealt with politicians that are not ours, in which our main thing is, well, we're going to hold them accountable, right? To asking ourselves the question, we have someone like Zoran who came from the movement, who helped bring the bill in the Senate of no more, no more, what was it, the no dimes or something like that. Not on our dime bill in the New York State Assembly, who's organized on the grassroots in Palestine, and to do two things. One is we have to, when we have our leaders in political office, understand the balance of power. We cannot demand that our political leaders take actions that will make them lose their power. We have to figure out how we are going to allow the left to consolidate that power and build a coalition. Now, that doesn't mean not being principled. Zoran, I think, did a really wonderful job of maintaining a principled position on Palestine while actually knitting together a coalition around him of some who were even soft Zionists but had been really repelled, soft liberal Zionists who were repelled by what the Netanyahu government were doing and were willing to support his candidacy despite that. Brad Landers, right? That was incredibly important. So we have to understand that what an activist is doing is different from what we're doing at the political level. And therefore the question becomes for us not to change our own positions, right? But understand what our politicians, and then how do we build the political support of our own constituencies, our own movement, so that we can help change that power dynamic and that power calculation to be able to further empower, whether it's Zoran or whether it's our 4 DSA city council members and 2 progressives who have put forward a really great resolution in our city council to be actually able to withstand the pressure they're going to face from centrist Democrats, the establishment, Republicans, and the attack. And we also have to understand that Palestine is going to be a moral issue. It's a central principle that you have to take on. If you don't, like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, you're going to lose. People see it as that. But it is not going to be the main issue on which people are going. Zoran's first commitment is going to be to pass universal health care. It is going to be to freeze the rent. It is going to be to make buses free, because those were the things that he promised to the 1 million New Yorkers that voted for him, and to be able to cohere that coalition and actually have power so we could win the broader working class and broader population to the kind of politics, not of despair and racism and hate, but actually of solidarity, that public and government could do good things again, that we could stop climate change, that we can be for human rights and actually have normal relations with countries around the world and not just try to dominate, require us to be able to convince the vast majority of Americans, and not just liberals in big urban cities on the coast, to convince them and to also show them that when we're in government, we can govern and make people's lives better. And so that is a thing that is going to take us years. There has to be patience, and we have to begin to rethink what our relationship is between movements, one from accountability to how do we have mass governance and mass support.
Thank you so much. This question is for Professor Beinin. Good to see you again after our event in Eugene some time ago. I wanted to ask about the significance of growing international recognition of the Palestinian state in changing these dynamics between the U.S. and Israel. I'm thinking particularly in terms of the Gaza marine field and natural gas development potential, where a Palestinian state that's recognized internationally could have claims over the exploration and development of that natural gas, which would provide a source of revenue and maybe change some of the economic dynamics that are sort of limiting it and sort of the relationship between Israel and the U.S. I just wanted to see your take about how significant that is as a development or not.
So, if we think about where the question of Palestine is in the arena of international relations and diplomacy, the only thing out there is two states. And then there is this minor obstacle that the state of Israel is not having a Palestinian state, and arguably was never on for a real Palestinian state. Now that doesn't mean that Palestinians should abandon the two-state solution, abandon the notion of a Palestinian state that will be the expression of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. No, they can hold on to those things. Maybe even they should hold on to those things. But a Palestinian state that has the powers that we normally associate with states, sovereignty, control over its borders, control over its resources, no, that is not happening anytime soon. Israel is not going to allow a Palestinian state to have control of the natural gas resources off the shore of Gaza or anything like that. That is simply not on. In order for that to happen, there has to be a thoroughgoing decolonization of the entire territory between the river and the sea, the dismantling of the occupation, the dismantling of apartheid. This is a big, big task. And we shouldn't fool ourselves that calling for a Palestinian state or France or Britain recognizing a Palestinian state, yes, I mean, it's a significant shift in international discourse that they did that, especially since the United States didn't want them to. But that doesn't mean that anything remotely resembling a Palestinian state is coming into existence in the near future. If it can come into existence, it will only be the result of the kind of struggle that we have not yet seen, a struggle that will have to be led by the Palestinian people, who do not now have the kind of national unified leadership that would be required to conduct that struggle. So in another, I don't know how many years, when conditions change and there's a clear Palestinian leadership and maybe they'll be calling for a Palestinian state, things will look very different than, oh yeah, 2 states. Right now, that's an almost meaningless notion.
I'd like to offer Mazen the opportunity to answer that question as well. Do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Well, these are very big questions, important stuff. The one thing that I see with the Palestinian issue that is not separate from any of the other oppressions that are unleashing in the United States, that it is at the forefront of the idea of stopping people. Remember, Benjamin Netanyahu came out saying that what's happening on the U.S. campuses is horrific. And just immediately after Trump took over, the main attack and the first attack was on that, and even which has started also at the time of the previous the old guy. So we would like to all forget him, right? Yes. But actually, it started then with all the the questioning of the university presidents and so on. But after that came through, the spearhead of the oppression that has been unleashed in the United States political atmosphere is primarily as a response to that. They're all responding to, we need to stop these people, we need to imprison these people, we need to revoke their visas. The first victims and people who went to jail and so on were Palestinian solidarity activists. These were once we put them forward, once it was accepted that these people would be jailed and put away and so on, that kind of paved the way for the rest of the chains of the oppression that is being unleashed to come through. So that, I think, remember, oppression works. And if it doesn't work, then you didn't use enough oppression. That's the way they think about it. And that is something that has been proved by primarily the work that Israel has been doing against the Palestinians and giving lessons. And primarily to say, if these things are not working, then all the relationship, the international relationship, international order, international humanitarian law, international declaration of human rights, these have to be vacated out of their content in order to make things work. And I think that in its essence is basically how and why it's putting the Palestinian issue at the top and the spearhead of moving not only progressives in that sense, but also people who actually are thinking of getting into this human rights, respect, and type of moral issues. The issue of genocide, remember the issue of genocide, and that was impacted and actually under our own eyes and accepted and financed and pushed. The issue of genocide is not only killing and how many people you killed, but we learned that what identified genocide is intent. And I have no doubt that they have the intent. And the intent for genocide does not have to be physical genocide, but it has to be a genocide of a different sort. I think we will be witnessing as much oppression and much attack parallel to what we've seen in the genocide campaign that Israel have done but it will unfold in a different levels. And I do agree that there is all kinds of movements, but within the, what you call the Christian Zionism, there is very little movement. Yes, you see somewhat Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson saying a few things, even Marjorie Taylor Greene, but these are not even making waves. The big, the core of the movement, the big core, is not moving. It actually is thinking of training 100,000 preachers to come and advocate for that. And that is advocating for the change in what we accept as citizens and what we accept as human international citizens and our moral values and what is possible. Basically, they will be saying that genocide is necessary to advance the will of God, the will of us, basically. And to the fact that I still expect a lot more oppression to come down because, as we said, genocide is an intent. It is not only an act. And they do have all the intent there is.
Thank you. I think let's do one more question and then we'll wrap it up.
We've been talking about the U.S.-Israel relationship tonight, and I was just curious if any of you have any insights or commentary on Israel cultivating relationships with other major powers. There seems to be a lot of resonances with, for instance, China creating a technological surveillance state and what Israel implements within historic Palestine, and also with the decades-long rise of Hindu nationalism in India and the party in India in control, which has close military ties with the state of Israel and has for decades. I have this fear that we're in like that initial period where it took many decades to form the close relationship between Israel and the United States, that we're in that period now between Israel and China or Israel and India. And I'm curious if any of you have any insights into that.
So you put your finger on the broad geopolitical reason that we might not win. Wael emphasized why we might win, and my heart is with Wael. I basically agree with what he said. But if we look out at the world now, not just at the shape of this country as we are becoming used to more and more fascistic tactics being deployed against our people, but as you said, India, Hungary, Italy, these are all authoritarian, neo-fascist, ethno-nationalist regimes that are very, very supportive of Israel. And parties like that are poised to take power in Austria, the United Kingdom, and France, and they are strong in Sweden and the Netherlands. So we are looking at a world, Wael suggested pre-World War I, but that looks maybe a little bit like the immediate post-World War I, 1920s, 30s, the rise of fascism. And Israel will be very comfortable in a world like that, and a world like that will be very comfortable with Israel. What is the antidote? The only antidote to that situation? A united front against fascism. But in order to win, the left has to lead the united front against fascism. That's very tricky because it means bringing liberals and all sorts of types who some people might think of as wishy-washy into a coalition that's led by the left. And that requires what Wael said, a degree of political maturity that not everybody on the left has quite yet developed, although Zoran has shown us how. So we have a lot to learn and a lot to do, but it can be done.
Wael, do you have a final thought on that?
I think that was great. The only thing I would add here is on the question of Palestinian leadership. I think the United Front, the left has to win in this country, and we have to govern to break our support for Israel in this country. And that would be a major blow, even if other countries go fascist, that it would be actually the beginning of a reconfiguration of being able to ally with different states. But I think short of a Palestinian leadership emerging, there will not be an opportunity to take advantage of that and crystallize that into something that looks anything like Palestinian liberation. And the Palestinian strategy has been dead in the water. The PLO strategy failed, and Hamas's strategy now has been catastrophic. The responsibility for the genocide is all on Israel. But Hamas's strategy has been catastrophic, and it repeated some of the mistakes of the PLO, which is that it allied and saw its allies not in the majority of the Palestinian average person organizing, going out into the streets, resisting Israel and connecting to Palestinians inside Israel, or with the vast majority of ordinary Arabs in the region, but that it hitched its wagon to particular regimes, which is what the PLO was forced to do. And those regimes, of course, one of the things that I think is really, really not talked about enough is the number one reason that the genocide was able to continue for 2 years is that the Arab masses, who are incredibly sympathetic with the Palestinians, have been utterly exhausted, defeated, killed, and jailed since 2011 when they tried to rise up and bring democracy to the Middle East. And a huge portion of those who jailed them were the so-called axis of resistance that were supposed to be the allies of the Palestinians. And the reason they were never able to take on Israel militarily is because of that social weakness. They had destroyed the forces in their own country that could even be able to withstand any of this. That's why the Assad regime collapsed. That's why we see the Iranian regime close to collapse today. And so what we can do, obviously, is organize, whether it's BDS, whether it's winning elected office and putting together that United Front coalition. But I also think we have to begin to bring forward Palestinian voices from the territories and begin to connect with Arab voices in the Middle East who are working on BDS, who are democratic activists, to begin to develop that international solidarity, and not ourselves in this country fall into that trap of, well, the allies of the Palestinians are whoever going to pick up the pieces now. Because, the problem is Israel and the Middle East, they may have knocked back the axis of resistance and reorganized the Middle East, but there's now tensions emerging between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and it's going to continue to be a problem. But the allies isn't going to be Saudi Arabia if they decide to champion the Palestinians or leverage their particular struggle to try to make themselves more powerful in the Middle East. It's going to be the people of the region, and ultimately, can Palestinians, and I think this for me is an open question, in a moment in which fascist regimes are rising and where liberalism is in terminal crisis and in a serious danger, if the right politics can emerge, not only can they cohere people internationally who want to fight against fascism, but I actually think if the right politics are pulled forward, a section of Israeli people who I think are desperate can actually be broken away from the Israeli state as well. And that'll be really critical to forcing that break so that the fascists and the right-wing nationalists in Israel don't fully win in that state as well.
Thank thank you all. Thank you so much, the three of you, for being here. Thank you for coming tonight. Please do check out the tables in the back, and thank you to our hosts. Good night.